Okay.
Who's hosting?
Okay, it looks
I
like we're
am.
streaming. Yes, we are.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking at the stream. I don't see it yet, but I assume there's a delay.
You got
We're here.
Oh,
We got an ad.
you got the banner up?
yeah. I got.
Skip the ad, and I'm looking at Eric. Hi, everybody. This is Alex.
Hang on a second. Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
What are we holding on for, Eric? Okay, we're having trouble. We're having trouble working out.
Okay, wait. Hold on. Hold on. One.
Eric,
No, we're all
I think
we're all set.
broadcasting. But I think we're broadcasting already, Eric.
Okay, hang on, please. Hold on a second. Patience. So I mute this so I don't get double sound. Hi, everyone. Oh, we made it by the skin of our teeth. We had some technical issues with YouTube, which is pretty common. But Tim Hutchison, who just came back from a month-long trip around the country, has saved our. Oh, I can't say a bad word now. But, we are up and running a little bit early. What time is it?
So yes, we
Yeah,
are
we're a little bit
early,
early.
and we may just want to have a conversation for 7 minutes here, until we get to our actual start time. So sorry about that, but I wanted to try this and make sure that things were working. So sorry we're early, guys.
Just run the banner.
Tim, you saved us. So we don't have any idea what actually happened, but it's something to do with YouTube. But I'm sure by next week we'll have sorted it all out. So,
but you know what we haven't done yet, Eric? We haven't Kai hasn't had a chance to make sure that he's hooked up right. So we should probably do that.
Kaiser Pro, you want to do a little test presentation?
Sure. Can you
Share
hear me?
your screen? Yes, you're all
Okay,
good.
let me try to share my screen. Let me see.
Everyone on YouTube, we're really not broadcasting yet. We're still testing. So you get to see part of what happens behind the scenes.
Can you see this?
Yes.
All right. Let me make sure I can.
Presentation mode?
Yeah. Let me get out. Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Astro Imaging channel. We're a little bit ragged tonight, but we made it just in time. Again, thanks, Tim. I don't know what you did, but we're up and running. We were supposed to have next week's presenter on. She hasn't come in yet. If she does come in, we'll give her a few minutes to say hello. By the way, Andrea, I looked at her site. She went to the possible cloudiest place to see the eclipse and got the clearest skies. Some of us went to the better places and got partially cloudy skies. Some of us went to the possible best places we could and got lots of cloudy skies. So congratulations, Andrea, for making a great decision. And we should have her come on. Her images of the eclipse are just fantastic. And she's going to be on next week to tell us about hydrogen alpha imaging, very, very narrow band of sun imaging, something that I do and Tim does, and I think Molly does as well. So that'll be a very interesting presentation. Tonight, Kai is going to tell us about using the Seestar for spectroscopy, to be an amateur scientist. But before we do that, just a couple things. I mentioned that next week, Andrea is going to talk to us about narrowband hydrogen alpha. After that, some of us on the show are going to give various ways to process our eclipse images. And the week after that, I think we're going to do 3 shorts. I'm not sure what the topics are going to be, but I'm sure we'll post them before that time comes on. How many people do we have? We should probably give people a few minutes.
We've got 40 people watching now, and I put a message over in the chat that we are going to wait until showtime before we start the program. And I've invited anybody who would like to chat with us or bring up something if they have a question to go ahead and type it into chat so that we can go ahead and chat until 6:30 in my case, 9:30 in other people's cases.
Or Tim and I can just get out our guitars and play a couple of tunes. What do you?
Please put something into the chat. Please, people ask us something.
Now, you don't know how well I play.
Oh, no, you've already. I know how well you play, and I know how well I play. As long as, for me, as long as we're not singing, we're good.
That's absolutely correct.
So, Tim, you could fill a little bit. How was your trip around the country with your bus?
Well, it was great. We left on April 1st. My buddy lives in Van, Texas, which is south of Dallas, and he invited us to come down there to view the eclipse. I have a 45-foot motorhome, and so my wife and I, Tony, took off on April 1st, and we stopped in a couple of places on the way down. We got there the day before the eclipse and got everything set up. And just before totality, a big honking cloud came over, and I said, "Oh, I'm not going to get anything." And this woman that was there with my friend Jim said, "Dear Lord, please let the skies clear and let Tim get his photo." And I said, I really appreciate it, and I respect the power of prayer, but I just don't think God's going to change the workings of the universe so that I can get a photograph. Didn't the skies clear up just before totality, and I got my shot. So it was a lot of fun.
We've got some questions coming in on.
Yeah. How
First
does
off,
one take? You want to take those, Alex? Go ahead.
well, I just wanted to. Jeff said thanks a lot for telling us about the UTech solar tracker. It worked very well. So kudos to, I think it was Jim that was harping on that. Now back to Matthew, who says, how does one pick diffraction gratings based on focal length and other factors?
Hi, are you going to cover that sometime during your
Yes,
presentation?
I'll cover that.
It's hold off.
Okay.
We still have got 3 minutes till showtime. So we're trying to hold off until the actual beginning of the show time before we get into depth on stuff.
Yeah,
But if you got something else.
I did use that UTech solar tracker during the eclipse, and it did work very well. So if any of you are eclipse chasers out there, I thought it worked great. Eric, did you use it as well?
Yes. I think it had an issue because the sun, as it got smaller and smaller in the sliver, it was trying to track that part of the sun rather than the disk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in hindsight, I might have been just better off, just doing a last minute alignment and then taking the 4 minutes without the tracker. Because I think the tracker, especially during totality, it didn't know what to do. This is in our tests, both yours and mine. It worked perfectly on a full disk. I think I never addressed the issue of we wouldn't have a full disk during C1 to C2 and then C3 to C4.
I knew that was going to happen, but I had enough room in my frame that it wasn't really an issue.
Yeah.
And then
Jeff says his worked perfectly even with lots of clouds.
Yeah.
Then we've got another question come in. Ivan asks, I'm working on observing satellite conjunctions and ask if anyone has tried to capture satellites. What about calculating altitudes by parallax? Hello, somebody out there?
Maybe someone online could help with that because
there is a site that give you the satellite trajectories, and you can calculate oscillations from where you are, just like ISS transits for the moon. It's very similar.
And what do you mean by conjunctions? Mean when they're going to be crossing a particular star or something? Or,
I imagine that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, I imagined. Otherwise, we have two satellites conjoining, and we're going to have a lot of trash up there.
Yeah, well, that's another. I think it's time for us to start the show. So if everyone's happy with that, Alex, you going to watch YouTube?
Yes.
We had kind of a rocky start, but I think we've given you an introduction, and The
Okay.
show is yours.
All
Go
right.
for it.
Thank you. Let me present what I have on my screen. Let me know if it's it. Coming. All right. Can you see it?
You're all good. Go for it.
All right. So thank you for inviting me back. So I'm gonna follow up on my last talk. So again, this is the part 2 of my initial talk that was back in January, and where I kind of introduced the Seestars. I won't go too much more details. If you want the basic ideas of Seestars, you can go back to that part. But I'll kind of quickly glance through, because I have a lot of material to kind of cover, specifically on spectroscopy and some of the science stuff. So the first few slides, I'll kind of go pretty fast. Recap, Seestar is a 250 millimeter f5 APO. It's a triplet smart telescope. Everything you need for tracking DSO and other imaging objects is here. It's an auto go-to osmos mount. It's an APO refractor, has autofocuser. It has electron filter wheels with 3 different filters: light pollution, cut filter, dark, and solar filter. It has a dew heater, it has a tripod, and it has an ASI air controller, so you can actually control everything with your mobile phone. And it has a replaceable lithium battery. It's 3 kilogram. It's cost $500. So in my mind, essentially it's everything you need for a student to get started to learn astronomy and STEM by actually doing. So to me, it's a great gateway for people to actually do not just imaging, but do a lot of science and learn how the tools are of the astronomers and professionals do. A little quick blurb about my group. I started a Facebook group. It's called Smart Telescope Underworld. It's dedicated to help members learn, share, and get the most out of their smart telescopes. And we take our pride in expanding the conventional usage and capabilities, not just what it gives us, but want to expand what it can do. My personal goal is I want to leverage this low-cost instrument to enable educators and students with limited means and very little background to appreciate and actually conduct field research and experiments in key concepts in astronomy and astrophysics. And I'm trying to show that in this presentation. Our group kind of famous in that we kind of showed how we actually mount the Seestar in equatorial. So actually a lot of people are start doing that and getting great success. I actually show how to use high resolution spectroscopy on Seestar back in November. So so this continuation of that. And the latest things I want to highlight is that we kind of now figure out how to do full automations of Seestars. What this means is that whatever limitation you had on the software, we now have a companion app that overrides everything. So what that means is that we can do mosaics, session scheduling, and fully scriptable. Kind of give you an idea is that we have created a framework called Seestar ELP that can go parallel with the Seestar applications on mobile app that control Seestars. And with this, you can use all kind of front ends, like a planetarium software, even ASCOM, and any apps in front. And what I have done is that with this, I can actually control a whole array of these Seestars. And I'll just demonstrate that a little bit later. So this is my current configuration. I have two times 2 sets of Seestars in equatorial mode. And for people who kind of confused on how to get the equatorial, it's that simple. I just made my actual rig this way. It cost me $10. And all the instruction how to do it is in my group and in quite a bit of documentation on and helping tutorials there. Some highlights of, again, our group is kind of proud of stuff in doing the crazies. So we have a few amazing guys. Pablo, last time I mentioned, the Frankenstein Seestar. He actually got out the whole Seestar and put a harmonic drives in both axes. And he put a solar scope and telescope in front. and this is his latest capture. Oops, solar flare on this solar scope. There's going to be a lot of material in this presentation, so it's going to be high level in this presentation, but a lot of deep dive are in these resources. I'm kind of mentioned I have a Facebook group, but I also have a Discord channel now where all the in-depth discussions are discussed here. Some of the discussions and videos are hosted by my YouTube channel. And the source for that companion app to do automation with Seestar is in an open source GitHub. So why are we talking about Seestars and doing science? To me, Seestar is the best bang for the buck. Let me kind of give you examples. I guess I have the first opportunity to kind of present some of our group members' capture of the recent eclipse. Seestar is a perfect tracker for sun. So these are some examples from 3 different members. We have tons and tons of members who kind of share their captures, and they just loved it. It tracks very well, and resolution for framing the solar eclipse is just great. You won't see too much of the corona, but in terms of seeing the prominence and stuff, it's mind-boggling. So see some of the images that can capture Seestars. So this is mine capturing the recent comet. This is 40 minutes in Bortle 3. One of our esteemed members, Andre, he specialized in doing really nice astrophotography with Seestars, and this is his version of in 14 hours of integration time in his Bortle 3 balcony. So you can get an idea of what it's capable of doing imaging. So last thing I kind of mentioned also, I also use the Seestars as conjunction with my other scope to do LRGB combination. I use Seestars to collect my RGBs and L using my bigger scope, and together it's worked pretty well. Last thing I want to highlight about the imaging part is that our group also started like a ultra stack challenge on a monthly basis where we asked members to send in the data. And the first challenge was month of February, where M1 we got 31 members contributing almost 73 hours of data. And this is one version of that final rendering of that image of the data. And give you an idea, the Seestar is also with mount, so you can see a lot fewer rotations because so much data coming in from all over the world. This is the data we gathered for March. Because we have people from the southern hemisphere want to contribute as well, so I say why not? So for North we got M51. We have 133 hours of data, and this is what we can come up with. And in the southern hemisphere, we have antenna galaxies with around 21 hours. And our members love it in that they can contribute what they can, and then from this, they can get this final fit data, and they can process whatever they like, and they actually publish their results into our club. So, but I'm not here to talk about imaging, because what I'm saying is that the Seestar, it's more than imaging. It's actually a gateway from astrophotography to actually doing citizen science. And let me kind of go through that a little bit. Now, from here, I'm going to kind of go through some of the high-level science. It's very low level. It's high level in that my target audience really just high school students or college students. And so, if you have questions, please stop me, and you're free to ask. Okay. So, how can we do science? So, a pretty simple way is that we can actually look for supernovas. So as you know, there's a recent supernova kind of discovered in January, and you can see here's an illustration. Supernova really is just somehow a bright star just suddenly appear. So you can imagine if we just scanned galaxy all over our universe and just scanned over time, you can actually do a comparison before and after. And if you happen to have automated software, you can actually find supernovas. Now, so this, we have actually 2 members who've been kind of spearheading in a group that kind of showcase what kind of data you can gather. So this is what they found back in probably January of that supernova. You can actually see the data they received, and they can actually analyze the profile and actually measure the magnitude of the stars. They can actually see how it changes over time. So what I'm saying is that Seestar is actually an instrument to collect light and look at counting photons. So what is that? So essentially it's photometry. So what we're doing here is that we're collecting light, looking at the light curve of the objects, and see how the light output of these objects changes over time. And that's all that is in photometry. Of course, this is very high level. To really get it in scientific paper, you need to be calibrated and standardized. But the basic idea is pretty simple. But you want to be automated, and ideally you want to be equatorial, so you get your data it's nice and clean, and you should have pretty decent signal to noise ratio. So let me give you some example before I go to spectroscopy about further application of photometry. So we have also member TCP/IP NUT. He actually track asteroids. So you can imagine an asteroid floating in the asteroid belt. You see typical asteroids have different shapes. Because of the shapes, the reflections of the light, it actually changes over time. So this is a pretty famous asteroid. And he actually measured the light, the photon changes over a period. And you can see how it changes over time. And in fact, he actually used the Seestars to actually track the asteroid changes over time in scales of 4 hours. It's pretty amazing in that with the $500 instrument, you can actually do a lot of the basic science that professionals do. I mean, you're not going to see very low, high magnitude, bright, low intensity asteroids, but the basic idea is there. So you can actually exercise the actual science and the tools and get familiar with it with a simple toy, a $500 instrument. Another of our member, Jared Bagman, he actually observed you can do binary stars and minor planets. In fact, he put his Seestars on his roof, and that's actually he actually officially registered with the official body, and he actually got a official minor planet observation code for this Seestar. And he's been doing observations of binary stars, and his ultimate goal is probably also looking for exoplanet as well, if it's doable. So here's an example of a binary star, V377. And you can imagine if you have two stars and the star orbit against each other, the actual total intensity from that point actually changes based on how the two stars orient against each other. Here's a cartoon version of that. You can see if it's side by side, you get the highest intensity. But if you have one star obstructing another, there's a dip. So these are kind of measurements by using Seestar or telescope like that to actually measure the light curve over time, and you can actually deduce, there is something funny going on, and you can deduce there's actually binary stars there. So these are pretty basics and pretty simple experiments and field study you can do with a simple telescope. The key here is that this telescope will track the stars for you. So any layman with just a phone and this telescope can actually do a lot of these right in their backyard. No special equipment needed. All right, so but I want to focus this talk on spectroscopy. So let me kind of give you a high level what exactly is spectroscopy. Spectroscopy at the very simple case is that you simply splitting the light into components like Isaac Newton. So in the basic idea, that's all that is. So, and why do we study stellar spectroscopy, which is the spectroscopy of stars? Why? Because, well, first of all, it's beautiful, because even nowadays, people actually want to put filters in front to actually see rainbows. But rainbow is not just for beauty. It's actually the science and the data It's actually tell you a lot about the stars. So let me kind of give you an idea of what kind of science is behind it. We all know the flames have different colors. If it's really hot, the flame's actually blue. If the flame is colder, it's yellow or red. That's exactly what's going on in this kind of curve. You can actually plot the intensity of your spectrum over wavelength. You can kind of gauge how hot that star is. So, for example, a very hot blue stars like Sirius would be very hot, and one of those red dwarfs, red giants, are cooler, and it'll be redder, and it'll be in this kind of range right here. And more than that is that if you have elements on the surface, they actually absorb radiations or emit radiation based on the type of stars. So then you can actually determine the type of elements on the surface of the stars. So, for example, these are kind of spectral lines of emissions for argon. So if you can actually find out if there's any emissions on specific peaks, you can now determine what kind of elements is actually on the stars. So stellar spectroscopy is essentially a combination of that. So here's a spectrum of a star, and you can see it's a superposition of two things. You can see an overall shorter. This is the tells you how hot the star is. So the wavelength here, on this direction is hot, this direction is cool. So if you look at different stars, this profile would shift. And actually, that would actually tell you some astrophysics about that stars, in that how hot, if it's hot, that means that it's a pretty young stars. And then as elements get burned up, they get cooler and cooler. So the profile actually shift. And because of these absorptions, you can actually look at these absorptions and determine, aha, there's these kind of elements. You have oxygen, hydrogen, sulfur, all kind of elements. You can determine what's actually on the surface. So that's what we can learn. We can actually learn how hot that star is and what's made of. But more than that, you can actually look at what we call, there are shifts of these absorption lines. A lot of people kind of know it's called the red shift or the blue shift. But the basic idea is that just like a train approaching you, if it's racing toward you, the sound would be very sharp and very high pitch. If it's going away from you, the frequency would be lower. So that same idea gives you that if you can look at these position of the peaks, and if these peak changes is shift from what we expect, we can now determine how fast the star is moving toward us or away from us. And in fact, if you can actually extend that idea, is that if the star spins, that means that the width of these spectrums would actually tell you how fast it's spinning. So just by looking at something like this, it'll tell you a whole bunch of physics about the stars. Okay, so I hope to kind of give you a basic idea why we want to do that. Before I tell you how we can do it, is there any questions? I can stop here.
Yeah, we've got a few piled up since then. And one thing I want to say for those of you who have just tuned in, we had a problem broadcasting tonight. And so we started the show about 9 minutes early. We did not start the content with Kai until regular start time. Now, Michael asked one early on about using ascom.alp to help, where is it, Becky, to slew to a point below the horizon. Oh, that's right. We've talked about that. Simulating polar alignment, and it failed with an error indicating that it was below the horizon.
Yes, he has asked that question before. He's talking about the automations applications that I've created that will automate Seestars. And yes, that application will help you track objects below horizon. And I will tape a video to describe how to do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, he was just commenting on it at the time. And I got to tell you something for those of you who are watching out there. What we do is we have one of us watching all that stuff, and we're supposed to be listening to the show, making notes of all the questions coming up, getting ready to ask them, and do all that stuff at the same time. So, and we've got me doing it, which is, I get confused easy. Larry Christensen wants to know if somehow we could get all those links that you had that were the sources of information and things like that. Where can one find those? Are they in a central place? Do you have it on a web page, on your Facebook, Discord, YouTube links? Where are they?
Yes, I have a few few avenues, channels, and what I can do is that I'm going to share this presentation in a comment in your TIC channel.
Okay.
In this presentation.
Okay, and so they'll be there. Greg wants to know what program you're using to study supernovae.
I write my own.
You what?
Essentially, I can do image processing, and I use OpenCVs and stuff, so I can actually do image processing on that.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Will be made available to. I'm waiting for that. I think we've caught up.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we're caught up. Thank
All
you.
right. So now that I kind of give you an idea what we can study just by looking at these spectrums, now I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this and how much it's going to cost. Because if you think about it, before, in order to have a system to follow the stars and break down the photons into spectrums and analyze it, they are in thousands for sure. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So to do that, well, typically people put a grating, transmission grating, in the optical path. So if you have a beam of a star coming in, if you put a grating there, it just like the prism, it's going to break the light into components. And the spreading of this is a function of the wavelength. I won't go through too much, but you can Google that. So here's a typical telescope. So here's a typical telescope, and here's the Seestars, and you have light coming in, and here's the lens, and the lens coming into your camera. So typically there's two techniques. One is that you put the grating inside, where it's focusing in here, and then you can actually split the light from here, and then get the color, and then spread into sensor. The other way is what we call objective lens grating. Is that you actually don't have to put it inside; you put it outside. Now, Seestars are all enclosed machines, so we actually have people put the grating inside, but it's kind of hassle. You don't want to break it out and put stuff inside. So a much more convenient way is actually put a grating outside, and this is what I'm going to show. So what we do is that we simply put a grating in front of the objective lens, and that will help spread the light. So here's the basic idea, experiments I did, is that if I have a full frame camera, this is a Canon R5, and if I put a diffraction grating in front, and based on the spacing of the grating, the lights are spread accordingly. So this middle is where the star is imaged. So if you have no grating, the star will be right here. But you put a grating in front, the light will be spread into different orders, and you see these lines. These are lines. I'm using a calibration, I think a neon lamp, to kind of give you an idea how the lights are spread. And you actually can see the color. The blue is right here, orange here, and red's right here. So you can see the less spacing, the more tighter it is. If you have bigger spacing, the more spread apart it is. And imagine this is a full frame camera. So this is 35 millimeter across. So give you an idea how the light are spread if you put a grating in front of the lens, and it's going to be imaged on the back of your full frame camera. But we don't have a full frame camera. But okay, so here's, if you actually look at the spectrum, if I put a line, if I look at the intensity across this line, that's what you're going to see, is that here's a star. And you can see, because my sensor in Seestar is color. So you have three components. You have blue, green, and red. And each will give you data. So this is the neon spectrum as I spread it with my grating. And you can see how it's spread across. And again, this is the length of my full frame camera. But how do I do that in a Seestar? So I've actually looked into 4 or 5 different sources. Typically, people have heard about Star Analyzer. That's typically used in even a conventional telescope. They put it inside, and they also can do objective lens. They typically has a 100 line or 200 lines. Now, the other thing I want to highlight in here is that there's actually 2 kinds. Is that you notice that some are only splitting up the data, the photons in one direction only. And there are some, the cheaper ones, actually spread to both sides. If you want to collect data, you want to collect photons, you want all the light going to one direction, because you don't want this size, because you're wasting photons. So that's called blazed and not blazed. Okay, but if you do that, so Star Analyzer are blazed transmission gratings, and it has 100 and 200 lines. There's actually cheap gratings you can buy from AliExpress. These are printed, and they actually come as far as 500 to 100 lines per meter. And what I found out actually is I'm going to give you a source where you can actually use even metal mesh that you can get even at Home Depot, which is equivalent to 127 lines per millimeter. And you can essentially source that for less than $1. So you can just buy something from Home Depot, put it in front of Seestar, and you got your telescope and doing spectroscopy. So here's some of the sources. And again, I'll share this slide, so you don't have to copy this for now. This is all going to be public. So here is how I set this up. I have my Seestar, and I simply I 3D printed a dew shield, and inside I actually put my grating in here. And I have different sizes, and this one is actually it's 50 millimeter square. Will cover the whole aperture of Seestars. If you have the Star Analyzer, which is roughly 1 inch, it'll be inside. And you simply just put it in front of your Seestar. And this is all I need to do spectroscopy on Seestar. So what can I do with that 20, 30 cents grating I just kind of mentioned from Home Depot? This is what you can do. With just that little metal mesh in front, I can image different stars and actually get a decent spectra from this. So you can see the actual spectra being diffracted. And this is, you can see that it diffracts from blue, green, and red. And if I do a lined measurement on the intensity, that essentially is your spectrum. And all this with that 20 cents piece in front. And here's a spectrum that I kind of mentioned. So again, this is that spectrum from from blue to red. You can see how hot that star is again. And this actually was done by Rob Glassy. It's actually a pretty cool star. It's actually it's emission stars, will actually emit helium and carbons. So we actually measured it, heated, and then you can actually see the bright peak here. These actually are these peaks, and they actually tell you they're actually emitting helium and carbon from this emission. How cool is that? Just from that little 20 cents addition in front of the Seestar. So this is how professional astronomers actually are studying astrophysics, is that they measure the photons and actually tells exactly what's the star composed of. And here's another collaborator I have, Jeremiah. He actually, in one night, he scanned 4 different stars of different temperature. I remember I told you there are blue stars and red stars. And based on that, you can see how this curve actually shifts from really blue to really red. So this is the red giant right here. And this is probably Sirius right here. And just from that little addition, you can study the stars, just both by temperature as well as composition. And here's a really exciting idea is that I found this out from a guy, so I cannot pronounce his name. But what he did is that he simply taped in front. There's a cool idea behind this is that by doing this, you got part of your aperture collecting spectra, while the other part of your aperture is collecting the normal star for tracking. So you can actually track the stars while collecting the spectra. And it's simply just taping in front. So it's very, very simple. So now you have an instrument to do spectroscopy with very little effort. Now, but I want to talk to you about a high resolution spectrum. What this means is that I want to get to this regime where I actually want to see the individual absorption peaks and see how it changes over time. To do that, I need to use higher line spacings, denser spacing of the gratings. But there's a problem to that, is that my field of view of Seestar is very small. So what I mean is that I have to image frames after frame to do that. So here's an example. If I imagine this is Seestars collecting data. Here's the first frame. I have to do a second frame, third frame, and fourth frame. It's pretty tedious unless you automate. So that's kind of things I've been working on, is to automate this whole process so that I can use Seestars using very high density diffraction grading and collect really high resolution spectra. And I'll give you examples. So give you an example how those individual frames look like. So here's a video of some of the subframes. So you can see here's subframes from one frame. Here's one frame, second frame, third frame, fourth frame, fifth frame, sixth frame, seventh frame. So you get the idea is that I'm actually shifting my Seestar's target to target different part of my spectra. By doing that, now I can get really amazing high resolution spectroscopy just using the same instrument, but just putting a denser grading. So here's an idea. Here's the green spectrum of the red giant. So here's the literature from that I find. This is resolution you see on the web. And this is resolution I get from my instrument. And what that tells you is that I can get dispersion of 0.4 angstroms per pixel. That means I can measure very fine details, some of the real physics behind it in terms of how fast it's moving from us. And now I can measure red and blue shift, and also measure the spins. And I can now also measure if it's a binary star or not, just by doing that. So if I stitch all that together, now I get a 10,000 pixel spectra of the whole red giant, all in here, by just using the instrument. I kind of mentioned this is how I do stitching. So if I have one frame to next, I kind of match some of the features together. Then I know how to stack it, just like stacking, no different. And from there, I can measure all kind of, with that red giant, I can now measure all kind of emissions, absorptions lines. So I can tell you what kind of elements are there. Here's others in terms of, this is a Sirius, the big blue star. Now it's very different in that it's very bright in blue. The other thing is that because it's very hot, that means it's very young. What that means is when it's young, that means that it's just full of hydrogen. So what you see here, these are the Balmer lines. Actually, these are these are absorption lines from just mainly hydrogen and very, very light elements, and nothing else. Whereas you see the red giants, you see all kind of absorption lines because there's a lot more material. Because after fusion, all these lighter elements fuse into bigger elements. So you can see the difference between a young star and a blue star. I can do all this with just a $500 toy. Okay. I want to go too far. So again, I get an idea. The motivation now is that I can do both low resolutions, or in that case, I can identify how hot the star is, what kind of surface elements there are. But now I can also do high resolutions that I can measure the redshift, the speed. Roughly 1 angstrom is equivalent to 55 kilometer per second in terms of speed. So remember, I told you my resolution is less than 1 angstrom, so I can actually measure resolution of less than that. All right. So is there any questions before I go to some of the other things?
Yeah, we picked up a couple from Greg, and let me get back to him. Apollo's answered some of these already, but can the Seestar autofocus with the diffraction grating in front of the lens?
It does not, but what I noticed that it does, does pretty decent job. But the key here is that, because that's one reason I created the automation app, is that now I can programmatically control the focuser. So what that means now is that I can actually take the actual image and actually pass it to my image processing to actually write my own autofocus routine just for spectroscopy.
Okay, so you don't use autofocus.
I don't use Seestar's autofocus. I wrote my own autofocus. It's programmatically doing myself.
Okay. And do you use Tom Field's RSpec?
That's one package I've used before. I use a different one. I'll describe that in the last slide. I actually use a free version that's available on the web. It's from the British Astronomy Club. It's called BASS, B-A-S-S. And I have a link to that at the very end of this slide.
Okay, we'll go in there yet. And Guzyaka wants to know, is Kai recommending the 200 or 100 grading? And is that thread-on adapter for Star Analyzer 3D printed or available for purchase? So 2 questions.
Sure. So I kind of highlight to you that it really depends on what kind of resolution you want. So if you want the very basic one, you can just buy the Home Depot special, 20 cents. But you want to do something that's a little bit more advanced and it's glazed. I think currently I recommend the 100, but I believe the guy from the RSpec is actually coming up with the wider spacing just for Seestar. So I think he's been experimenting with that. But it really depends on your goal. But I would start with 100 if you want to use the RSpec. But I've been using the high resolution one, which is it's from a different vendor, and it's amazing.
And the adapter?
The adapter is that I published a 3D file, but also a few members asked me to make some for them. I did that with a very small cost. I just shipped it to them.
John has a question that you may be covering in the future. Not seeing how to get from spectral lines to the graphical plots that you're showing us.
That's where the BASS software and the RSpec comes in. I have a link at the very end where I give you the whole. Actually, the BASS has its own instruction, but I just found out this morning a YouTuber created a video just to show you how to do exactly that. To generate the spectra using BASS.
That's the questions that are available for us. Anybody that has any questions, be sure to type them into chat and we'll try to get to them, okay?
Okay.
Kai, I have a question for you. You showed the complete spectrum of Betelgeuse, and you showed what was published. So are you telling us that your spectrum is much, much more detailed than the published data? And if
Well,
it is, have you published it?
yeah, well, first of all, there are a lot of published data. So I just find one from Google. So I'm sure there's going to be a much higher resolution ones out there. But what I'm saying is that this is better than a typical reference spectra from Betelgeuse. So the black line here is the reference Betelgeuse spectra. So you can see these individual peaks, they're not noise. They're actual real data. It's measured. And
Yeah,
because,
so if those are not noise, if that's real data, then God, there's 10 times more data in your data than there is in the one you referenced.
well, it is, but again, there are a lot of different quality reference spectra. But I just randomly picked one. I wasn't really doing exhaustive search, but again, I would say there's definitely going to be people who do a lot more high resolution spectra, much higher resolution than this. But in terms of a layman doing a simple Google search, looking at it, this is the best I can see with like 30-minute search in Google.
Have you considered
That's
actually publishing
this?
this?
The point I want to bring back is that it's amazing with just putting a high this 300 line grading that I use in front of Seestar, I can get spectra with this quality. It's
so
amazing.
have you considered publishing this in a science journal?
I actually talked to the RSpec author. He's confirmed it, and he was actually quite impressed. So, but I have not. But I'm going to have been in touch with the ARV society, I think. And so I will be in touch with them. But all this is published in my group because I'm retired, so I'm not into publishing game anymore. But I just want to share this with everybody else so they can just take it and run.
So my other comment would be, even if you don't have perfect focus, you're looking at spectra. So it's not as critical as getting resolution in a nebula or something.
No. In fact, one of the ideal, good thing about doing spectroscopy is that you don't even need to have good seeing or really good conditions, because you can always go to Betelgeuse or Sirius. You can always get a good spectra. The key here is that if you want to do spectra on a dimmer stars, I figured out how to do stacking and tracking with Seestars. And that's one reason why I did my own automation, that I can actually start tracking and do very dim star spectroscopy. And do all, and the key here is that the key thing is to do automation, because if I want to show this to students, they don't want to have a high bar to do a lot of manual and mundane things. And I will show them how to do all that with a few clicks. And that's my goal, is that automate the whole thing in terms of acquisition and let them do the processing at the end. And it's all ready. So in fact, the automation app that I think one of your callers been asking, I released that a week ago, and a few people have been pretty successful with it. So I'm pretty happy. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so not just that, I want to show you something that I think is actually patentable, but I decided not to patent it. Actually talked to a few people. So one of the issue with doing spectroscopy is, okay, of course you can do these spectrum, but really because it's such a high resolution, there's no reference. I don't have the zero order of the star to give me an idea. How do I calibrate? I don't know. I mean, I can tell you the peaks, but remember I told you the peaks shift based on how fast or moving toward us or away from us. So one of the big issue with spectroscopy is how to calibrate. So I figured that out. So there's a few options that I figured that actually I actually did a little search on it, but I haven't seen any reference of this at all. One thing cool about Seestar and any other typical AP rigs is that you actually have narrowband filters. What's narrowband filter is that it's actually allow in light coming in exactly a very fixed window. But once you know the fixed window, bam, now have a reference point of the rough idea where the line is. So that's exactly what I did, is that these are the two emission windows that's in the light pollution filter in Seestars. By knowing that, by characterizing that window, I can now tell you any peaks inside. I can tell you roughly, in pretty good accuracy, the wavelength of that peak. That, I think, is pretty cool. And I kind of demonstrated that to a few people, and they were actually are pretty positive about this idea. So that's one way. Does that make sense to people? Okay, now I'll go on to the next one. There's actually two other things I can actually do to calibrate the spectrum. I won't go through too much, but I can kind of present it to a few people, and there are ways for us to kind of do just by looking at the eyes, can tell you roughly what is the emission spectrum wavelength of each of these peaks without doing a real lamp calibrations in a pretty first order accuracy. Okay, so let me kind of give you ideas of what we kind of overcame to actually allow what I think a high school or college teacher or students to actually go ahead and start doing spectroscopy on Seestar. What happened is that there are issues if that the Seestar, the aperture is pretty small. But the problem then is that we need to be able to stack these images to bring up the signal to noise ratio. So we figured out how to do that. We now can actually stack spectra even without stars. We figure out how to take care of high resolution spectra because I figure out how to able to do framing and do essentially mosaic of these spectra and stitch together. I kind of mentioned that we can actually do focusing on the stars. So now we can actually autofocus on the stars. We also figure out how to do equatorial mode. So that means that there's no more field rotations. One of the issues with field rotations is that the spectrum actually fans just like just circle, just rotates. But if you get rid of the field rotations, then the spectrum now can stack perfectly. And the big thing is that we now have way to do automations, the full automations to collect data with scriptable applications. So all these things now have a way for us to resolve. And I have a few videos in my channels to kind of describe exactly all these, how it's done. And my goal is that we'll publish all this and we'll start broadcasting and try to get more students and teachers involved and try to pass the knowledge that we gathered and found. And hopefully now students and teachers can actually use a very simple instruments to do essentially what professional astronomer can do. But of course, won't be the same quality, but they get that basic idea, and now they know how to use the tool in the field. Again, here's the resources. Oops. So these are the links. Again, this is my Discord channel, where most of the intense discussions are in. My Facebook groups here, YouTube, my GitHub with the code, and this is the software about doing the converting from the images to actual spectrum. And actually analyze from the spectrum, you can actually analyze the elements and actually do a whole bunch of scientific calculation in terms of redshift, blue shift, and rotation speed, all kind of stuff. It's all in here. All right. That's my presentation. So is there any questions?
Oh, we've had some other comments and questions. Some of the people are just talking with each other, but Guzi Alpha, who we also know as John now, has some. He notes that you can do the spectras in various ways, and Apollo's Vista sounds like he's done a lot of work already in this. He's given us some good suggestions here. Hi, Barbara. Good to see you here. And then Kurto has some questions, but I'm not sure if they're for you. Okay, yes, they are, because he's answered me back. Where is it? I have the Orion XT12G and the SV305. What is the best cam for my scope to use for live stream video? Can you help with that?
I don't think so.
Okay, so if anybody else out there in the chat room wants to answer those kinds of questions, you can go for it, but we won't ask Kai. Okay, and that's the end of the chat group. Is anybody in the room have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but when I hear this presentation, I said, gee, maybe I should get myself a Seestar and give this a try with all the other stuff we're doing. It is
I recommend it. It's a very good investment. It's pretty cheap and it does a lot of things. The key thing more that is that it just, we now know how to expand what ZWO give us. So that's really the key, is that we can do a lot more than what they think. The one thing I have issue with Seestar as shipped by ZWO is that the software it gave is pretty rudimentary. Kind of more like a snap and click type of software, but you know, a lot of hardware inside can do a lot more. So that's what we figured out and do that.
Have you ever thought about going into used laboratory equipment and get some, like an old Beckman spectrograph, and taking the grading out of it? Because that would be a more professional kind of grading than what you might buy.
Oh, sure. Actually, the 300 line one is actually pretty. It's up there. It's close to like Edmund optics quality. It's very nice. I'm enjoying that a lot. But yes, I actually have thought about getting some second-handed spectroscopy equipment, actually ripping it apart.
You've got some kudos coming in, but there's a question from Matthew who wants to know how much Python or programming experience knowledge do we need to utilize your tools?
My goal is that it's going to be simply installing a few files, and it's all a few clicks. There's no programming involved. It can be as simple as just install and click, but as complicated as anything you want. It's essentially, it's a framework, and I made it so that it's at least for a few people that already from our group, it's very easy to use.
And can you do this from, say, city skies, you know, Bortle 5, 6, 7?
Well, it already depends on how much you're willing to stack, right? You just want to get above the noise. Doing stellar spectroscopy is actually not too bad. Sirius is really, really bright. So there's a lot of bright stars. So you can start easy, but if you be adventurous, you can go to Mag 11 stars and doing some spectroscopy as well. But there are Mag 2 stars that you can do it in Bortle 9.
It seems like the red stars are a lot more interesting than the blue stars.
Oh yes, but the blue star is perfect for calibration, because all those lines are perfectly lined up just alpha to Balmer lines. So there, you can use that as my calibration. Then you can now go to the red stars and start digging into all those heavy elements. It's amazing. It's so
and the blue
many
stars aren't shifted that much. I mean, there's no.
But the thing is that a lot of these popular stars, they are all studied, so you can always find a reference for them, right? So they are all studied, so you can use a published spectrum and use that as your calibration.
So how many, is it a linear function, or is 2, 3, 4 points? How many do you need for
calibration? I forgot to mention this. One of the key thing about having the grading in front of the lens, of the objective lens, that all the light coming in is parallel. What that means is it's ideal grading. So in theory, it's almost linear. It's when I measured it, it's linear within fact in order of like 10 to the 4. It's very, very linear. So
2-point calibration will.
2-point calibration will do you good enough for high school or college. But you're talking about professional publishing, then of course that's a whole different story. But in terms of getting you the baselines, 2-point calibration is enough. But that's a different story if you put a grading inside, in which case the lights are converging, in which case then you worry about that higher order dispersion. But it's amazing. I'm surprised not more people are talking about using these type of grading in front. It's so easy, and you actually do a lot of science without much work. So it's really a new era for people who's willing to do a little investment. They can do a lot with the technology we have now.
So what would be your total investment if it's $500 for the Seestar? What else do you need to purchase?
Well, you saw one of the slides I show you. The guy simply tape a grading in front. So 500 plus 20 cents plus the cost of a Scotch tape.
Let's see. I don't know. You'll have to calculate.
And I'm giving my software for free, so it's my goal is that anybody can get started. So
what's the cost of the 100 line gradient?
That's the RSpec, that's the Star Analyzer. Typically, it's going for around 200. The AliExpress, they're around $10-20. But the good thing about these more professional ones, they are blazed. So that means that you're having more photons going to the data that you want.
And of course, for the cost of the Scotch tape too.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Okay, you guys, before you get too far down into those weeds, Max has a question for you.
Sure.
Have you been able to correct for the instrument response on your one-shot color spectrum of Betelgeuse? And how did you correct for that instrument?
I'm glad you. I have a few slides in that I kind of jumped through it. So the key thing is that I kind of mentioned you can use Sirius or some of the very popular stars where the spectrum is fully published, right? So what that means that you can use that response curve from published data, and you compare it with your current observed curve. You divide. That becomes the response curve. In fact, ZWO published, or actually not ZWO, it's Sony published the IMX462 sensor spec. So it's RGB sensor. So you actually know the response curve for the sensor itself. But the best way is simply just take the published response from published data, take Sirius or something, and then you measure yours, and the ratio of that two is your total system response curve. Keep in mind too is that the grading itself actually has a variation in term frequency. So that'd be my best suggestion is to simply take the reference from Sirius or there's a lot of published spectra already. Use that as your basis.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got it. There's some guys that are apparently doing a lot of work out there, and they're having a conversation too. So you're not alone.
And right. I'm looking. You held your audience from the beginning to the end.
Oh,
so obviously a topic of high interest. And again, I'm always inspired. Well, maybe I should go get one just to have one in the telescope museum. But I'll resist the urge. But fascinating.